Hello and welcome to Sip Sip Hooray, a podcast for the wine curious and people thirsty for fresh takes on a favorite beverage. On the podcast today, who doesn't love a good ghost story? A haunting tale about spirits lurking among us. I know what you're thinking. This is supposed to be a wine podcast, but bear with me as I connect the dots, because the winery we're talking about today has roots that date back to the gold rush in Oregon. We're headed to the storied Willamette Valley and a picturesque place called Ghost Hill. Our guests today are Cam Bowers and Bernadette Bayless Bowers, the husband and wife team behind Ghost Hill Cellars. We are the two Marys who like to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm Mary Babbitt.
I'm Mary Orland. You probably don't think of gold or the gold rush when it comes to the Willamette Valley, but it's the foundation for our guests today, for their families, farm, ranch, and now vineyard and winery. We'll get to know this history and tell a few ghost stories along the way. But we are so pleased to have Cam and Bernadette join us. They've just informed us that they just were harvesting their Pinot Noir grapes this morning. So we are so happy they're here. They've been up fairly early, so it's great to have both Cam and Bernadette join us. Guys, welcome to the show.
No, thank you.
We're super glad to get to know you and hear the story of Ghost Hill Cellars. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't get the whole spooky part, if we didn't get right to that. So you want to tell us some of this history? And as we said, it goes back to the gold rush and a miner who may have lost his fortune.
And his life.
Okay, do tell.
So the road that the farm is on used to be a major military road that runs all the way from the southern border of Oregon to the northern border. And right next door to where the tasting room is now was a stagecoach stop. So people would come up, miners would come up from southern Oregon with their gold and camp on the top of the hill where we are and follow the stagecoach into Portland the next day. This particular miner, they think someone probably followed him up from the gold fields, and he was murdered. His gold was stolen, and his horse was also killed in the process.
But he haunts you still?
He has been seen by some people, so I think he's still around.
Have you seen him?
I have not, but I've also made it very clear to him that I don't want to see him.
Oh.
So it's fine
Wow.
if he's here, but don't show up.
A ghost who listens.
So there's a long legend or history of storytelling here on our farm of sightings of the ghost. So the killing took place, we believe, in the late 1870s, and our farm, we didn't get here until 1906. And when we got here in 1906, this hill was already called Ghost Hill. And many of the people, the reason it was called Ghost Hill is because there were repeated sightings of a rider on horseback circling the hill looking for his poke of gold. And when our family got here in 1906, this was a 40-year-old story. And they immediately started clearing the property to farm it. And when they did, they uncovered the remains of the horse and the saddle. And so sort of reinforced the story. And so much so that our ancestors, for the most part, stayed away from Ghost Hill and farmed the rest of the 220 plus acres of the farm. And so the new tasting room and vineyard that we've put up here on Ghost Hill is in some ways just the beginning, perhaps, of the ghost story.
Wow, that's fascinating. So they were so spooked by it, they just left the whole area alone? Like, hey, we won't touch that. We don't want to be haunted?
Yes.
Amazing.
I feel them.
Mm. Okay.
And there continues to be, since we've even been up here, there has continued to be, some very eerie things happening. We've had the guy who built the place swears he saw the ghost on 2 occasions. He called me late one night and said, "Hey Cam, you have a ghost up here." And I said, "Well, I hope so, because it's called Ghost Hill." And he said, "No, I'm serious. You have a ghost." And we've had other people who have had the feeling of a spirit. And we're actually going to have a Halloween party here on October 25th. It'll be our first ever Halloween party on Ghost Hill. And we've had a medium asked to come up, and she wants to try to connect with our ghost. So we'll see what happens with that.
Oh, that could
I
be
love
really great. Wow. So you kind of maybe stirred up the spirit by building the tasting room on top of the hill.
And who's to
Maybe.
say
I'm
he's an
thinking,
angry spirit? Who's to say?
right.
Maybe he just wants to enjoy some wine and good times with people. Maybe he's over his loss of money and doesn't need revenge anymore.
I do think that he's absolutely loves just seeing everything that's going on. Watching the concrete be poured, watching people on their phones. He just seems to follow people around and do little things that make people think, oh, what's going on?
Cool. So Cam and Bernadette, it's a 2-part question. First, I would love to know what the first glass or bottle of wine each of you ever had, and did that possibly spark your wine journey? If not, what did spark your wine journey?
Yeah, I'll go first. I actually worked. Bernadette and I lived overseas and in the Asia Pacific area for a long time, including New Zealand and Australia. And one of my first friends got into the wine business in Western Australia in a region called Margaret River. And he really got me interested in starting to think about wine and the possibilities, knowing what we had back here in Oregon. And so some of my favorite wines come out of the Margaret River area. I love the Cabernets out there. Things like one of my favorites is Suck Fizzle was the name of the winery, and always one that I think about when I think about some of the early wines that I tasted.
And Bernadette?
I have no idea, honestly. My dad was in the 70s. He was very interested in putting grapes in, and my grandfather, who still owned the farm, would not allow him to. So when I remember going to having to sit outside classes that he took, with David Lett. So I'm sure I started tasting wine very far back in the day. So it was always on my radar.
Well, and Bernadette maybe is being a little modest here, but she did grow up with Adam Campbell and his sisters at Elk Cove, and I think they spent a few days in the cellars there when they were younger.
Fun. Well, so can you give us the story of the family farm and what you were farming before you got into grapes, and do you still have any other crops besides grapes? Kind of give us the family history a bit, if you would.
As soon as my great-grandfather got here with my grandfather and his brothers, they started clearing everything and then started a dairy. So they started with a dairy, used to take the milk into Portland on the sternwheeler. And then I don't know what changed for them, but they decided that dairy was not the thing they wanted to do anymore. So they started raising sheep. And after the sheep, my dad started raising beef cattle. And so through all that time, there was also hay being produced and wheat and oats. And I grew up with Black Angus beef cattle. And then as my parents got older and as my brother and I went off to do different things, we just can't do a cattle farm on your own. So he tapered out of the cattle business. Right now, we don't have any cattle, and the parts of the property that are not planted in vineyard are rented out by a farmer that we've known forever. So he, this year we had crimson clover, and he rotates crops on it now.
Okay. So I know that there's a story behind possibly the motivation or impetus for Bernadette, your father, to start planting grapes. And I think it's because a certain winemaker in the region inquired about buying some property. So can you?
Yeah.
And I would love for you to tell us that story.
Yeah, I could tell this one. This one. So Bernadette and I were living in China in the late '90s, and we actually got married in Hong Kong. And Bernadette's dad was sitting there, and I asked him, I said, Mike, how is the cattle business? And he said, well, it stinks, literally and figuratively. And, back in the late 90s, wine was starting to really blossom here in the Willamette Valley. And so I asked him, I said, well, why don't you plant grapes here? And he goes, well, I'd love to, but I'm a land-rich, cash-poor farmer. And Bernadette and I said, well, that's something that we can all do together as a family. And so the first thing that we needed to do is find out if we could even grow grapes where we were, because nobody had planted any grapes here. So Mike knew Ken Wright from Carlton, and Ken Wright came out to the farm, and we walked the farm with him for about 3 hours. And at the end, Mike said to Ken, so Ken, what do you think? Can we plant Pinot Noir here? And Ken looked up at him and said, you sure can. How much do you want for it? And Mike immediately said, well, no, this is my family farm. I can't sell it. And we knew he was serious because he and Tony Soder went next door and bought the property immediately adjacent to us. But that property was covered with trees, and they had to take all the trees and stumps off the property. And so when Mike and I were looking over at that operation while we were planting our vineyard, we were thinking to ourselves, I think we've made a good decision here.
Oh,
So,
that's so cool.
That's great. So Cam, just for our listeners who may not be familiar with who Ken Wright and Tony Soder are, can you explain just quickly who they are and the significance of their interest in your property?
Yeah, so Ken Wright and Tony Soder are two of the most prominent winemakers in Oregon. They've been here many, many years. Ken is based in a little town called Carlton, which is, if you've never been there, is one of the coolest little towns in the whole state of Oregon. And these two guys are really two of the, I would say, the 80s and 90s people who took the work that the early pioneers of the Oregon wine industry and really put it on the map. And so they're well-known winemakers here. They're great people. They're great neighbors of ours. They still operate in this little area. We call it Savannah Ridge, which is our little piece of the Yamhill Carlton AVA. And so to kind of get that validation from them was very important. And as a matter of fact, both of them still farm and use the vineyards here in Savannah Ridge to this day, 25 years later.
That's fantastic. Can you tell our listeners what makes that area, the Carlton AVA, the Willamette Valley, what are the conditions around Ghost Hill that make it so great for Pinot Noir?
Yeah, it's actually a phenomenal little area that we have here. And there's three things that I think really make it stand out for us here in the Willamette Valley. One, of course, is the soil, which is almost 100% Willikense, which is a marine sediment soil that was put in here, 60 million years ago through volcanic activity. It's rare to get sort of a single soil type across such a large area. The second thing is that the way that the ridge is southwest facing is ideal for Pinot Noir, and not everyone has that, and you can get different facings on different ridges, but this particular ridge is ideally positioned for planting Pinot Noir so that it gets maximum sun exposure so that we can get it ripe. And then the third piece is our little area here is almost like a little bowl, where right between the coastal range and the rest of the valley to the east, and the wind comes over the coastal range and just sweeps through our little bowl here up even up to here where we are on Ghost Hill. And those three conditions just make it ideal for growing high quality Pinot Noir.
That's fantastic. And have you thought about Chardonnay, or you're just totally dedicated to Pinot?
We did just plant, when we built the new tasting room, we planted some Chardonnay up here on the top. So we planted a little more Pinot and some Chardonnay. So we branched out.
Fantastic. That's great. So how did you all go about learning how to farm grapes, how the wine gets made? Tell us about that, and also talk about your winemaker.
Yeah, so that's been a real journey for all of us. The one benefit that we have is Bernadette's father, Mike, and brother are both lifelong farmers. And so they know the farming side of the business inside and out. And in fact, we've had several winemakers, even in the last few weeks, come through the vineyard and just comment on how well maintained and how well farmed the vineyard is. And so that the farming side of it, while there's been a lot to learn, we do have a lot of core experience there. On the winemaking side, that really has been a journey. So we've had 3 winemakers. We started with a small winemaker who, really kind of pushed us into the wine business, because when we were originally looking at this, we were going to be grape farmers. And so our first winemaker kind of pulled us along as one of our customers for the grapes and pulled us into the wine business, probably a little earlier than we were expecting to get in the wine business. But then that was in 2006. And then we had a fantastic winemaker, a young woman who was just getting her start in the wine business. And we had her from about 2008 to 2015. And she actually got called into military service. She was in the Guard mid-vintage in 2015. And she left and went in and pursued her military career. And she stayed in the military for many years after that. But mid-vintage, an old family friend and a pretty well-known winemaker in Oregon himself, Eric Homaker, stepped in and helped us complete that vintage. And he's been our winemaker ever since. And Eric is a guy who was involved in early grassroots winemaking in Oregon through the Carlton Wine Studios. He started that venture. He is part of the Ponzi family. He's married to Louisa Ponzi. Mm-hmm. And so he has, a lot of pedigree, both on his own account and then, just through his family roots. And so we're very fortunate to have him both as a friend and as our winemaker.
And you guys are churning out some great wines. The critics seem to really love the Pinots that you guys are making, which is a true credit to both Eric and your family's commitment to this. And I was thinking, before we start talking more about the wines themselves, I was thinking about the fact that Bernadette, you and Cam have both lived all over the world. And you didn't start out, Bernadette, you grew up on this family farm, but you didn't think that this was going to be your path. And then, so you go out on your own around the world working, get married to Cam, and then now you're back on the farm and you've helped save the family farm and you have this new venture. Tell me, what does that feel like for you? And is this your happy ending story where this is where you were always meant to be and you're glad you're back?
Yes, I think so. I always knew I wanted to leave the farm and go, have my adventures. I just didn't think that I would want to come back as quickly as I knew I wanted to come back and be here. But I had things to do and commitments to fulfill. So once we got a chance to come back, we came back. And our kids, we came back every summer and we stayed for the summer because we were overseas, so we could do that. Mm-hmm. So it's just, I've always thought of this as home. I will always think of it as home. Our kids think of it as home. It's just where we need to be. And it's great being back with my mom and dad and my brother. And it's just gorgeous. So really can't ask for anything more.
Well, and you've completely turned the business from cattle and hay and large crops like that to these specialized vineyards producing world-class Pinot Noir. It's pretty exciting. And you've added a big tasting room and a place for people to have their celebrations at Ghost Hill. So that's a pretty big venture, I imagine, for your family. That opened just last year? Or was it this year? Oh, this year. Well, goodness. Can you still smell the fresh paint?
Yes, you can.
Well, tell us about that then.
It was really great. We always had this plan. We always knew we wanted to build on top of Ghost Hill because it has amazing views. And we were just ready after extensive wine tasting all over the world, because we had to do some research. We had a plan in mind.
Wink, wink.
Yes, exactly. And my dad and mom and my husband and I and my brother just were all on the same page with what we wanted this space to look like, what we wanted it to feel like, what we wanted it to represent. So it's, really rich in family history up here. We have a lot of pictures of my grandparents, and it's just a wonderful place for people to come and just relax. And it's just been a joy getting to know so many people and sharing this space with them.
Can you describe the actual space, the actual building? It's really beautiful. Since we're only an audio medium, people can't see what it looks like. So can you describe it and how the design came about?
Yeah, so this was a real family effort, and we actually knew exactly what we wanted to build. And so the process was interesting because we had to sit down with a few architects. We didn't always connect with the architects in terms of what our vision was. And so we had somebody suggested that why don't you work with a custom home builder? And so we found a custom home builder in McMinnville called Creekside Homes, and they actually listened to what we wanted to design. And what we've built is this modern farmhouse space with garage doors that open and you get full airflow through the entire facility, that it's surrounded by a porch veranda that has 360-degree views. We've used wood from our own farm to accent the space. And probably one of the most interesting things is all of the tables that are in the space were built by our family and by Bernadette's father.
Wow.
In particular.
I love that.
They're all black walnut. It's the first thing anybody ever says when they walk into the building is they look at the tables and they start walking around, feeling the tables, and just they're in awe of them. And then they start looking at the space. And I make a joke because we do small weddings here, 50 to 100 people sized weddings, which is kind of the hot area of weddings these days. And I think our success rate is about 95% of people who come up here and see the venue decide to get married here. And we even had one couple who walked in not even thinking about getting married, and actually decided to get married after they were here and immediately signed the contract and paid for it. So it was.
Oh my goodness!
That was before they started drinking any wine. I want to be clear about that.
Wow, that had quite an impact then.
Yeah, the views on one side are the Pacific Coast Range and the valley, and you can see at least 5 vineyards from the one side of the building, and the other side you're looking at the back of the Dundee Hills on a protected forest area. So all around, it's just natural and beautiful. and
Oh,
calm.
and I just love the family connection that you guys are all in this together. And I think so often in the wine world, people are used to, certainly if you visit Napa Valley, those are some great big wineries and big productions, and they're often making great wine, but you have perhaps a less personal experience when you visit because it's a big business. It's a big operation. And
Yeah.
to hear you guys talk, you joined us having just started harvest this morning, to hear your family story, how this is the family farm and how you grew up there and that you're still there. And now Cam, you're helping too as the husband and the business guy behind it. And I just love that there's a deep connection to a family, and it's not just a corporation, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's part of our whole, uh, I guess, vision up here is we did this because we want to keep the farm in the family. We want to keep it in the farm for future generations. That's very important to Bernadette's parents. And it's very important to us. So we are just reinventing ourselves continuously to keep our small family farm in the family. And you talked about that harvest this morning. It was fantastic for me because this morning it was, myself, my son, my brother-in-law, my father-in-law, out there actually working the harvest. And we had some friends visiting, and they just commented on what a fantastic, view of generational farming. And that's what we're trying to achieve here.
Oh,
Wow.
that's really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to talk about your wines. You all sent us some to try, and thank you so much for that. I want to start with the rosé, which is beautiful. So you all call your vineyard the Bayless Bauer Vineyard,
Yes.
and this rosé is just one of, it's just so crisp and lively and just delicious.
Really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And a
you.
beautiful color too.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So rosé, in some ways put us on the map. We've always taken rosé seriously. We needed to because, I said we started off as grape farmers and all we had was 16 acres of Pinot Noir. So we had to become creative on what we were going to do to please our customers that were, white wine or lighter wine drinkers. And so we came up with this rosé. And in 2014, Wine Spectator recognized us as one of their top 70 highly recommended rosés in the world.
Nice.
So, we were on the cover of that edition is Brad Pitt holding his rosé, and Bernadette and I looked at each other and went, he's making 25,000 cases of rosé, and we're making 250 cases of rosé, and we're on this list.
Yeah.
So you're Brad Pitt. That don't impress me much.
I love that. That's great.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Go Ghost Hill.
And then you have two different Pinots. You've got the 2019 that you sent us, and then you also sent us the 2018 Reserve that you call it the Prospector's Reserve. And I have to say on that one, even though it's 6 years on from harvest, it's just very youthful, silky, savory. And, from both of your Pinots, I get this really great minerality, the red fruits for sure, bright cherry, cranberry, but you've got a savoriness on both of them.
Yes, that minerality comes from the soil. Again, the sedimentary ocean soils from the Missoula floods. So it's just a wonderful, the minerality, the almost a tiny bit of a saltiness to it.
Mm.
I have to ask you all about a quote I read that you all like by poet Robert Frost.
Yes.
And he's the quote is, The land was ours before we were the land. Can you explain the significance of that to you?
My dad loves that quote, so that is his mantra. Like we belong to the land. We've always belonged to the land. The land was here before we were. The land will be here after we are. We're the stewards of the land. It's our job to take care of it.
And tell us about the ways in which you guys are trying to do just that.
We sustainably farm as much as we can. We're very conscious of making sure that we are not using anything toxic to the native environment. We're working to take care of the area and keep Oregon as beautiful and green as possible.
One of the things we do is I joke about it, is we never get rid of everything. We always try to repurpose everything. Even in this tasting room, there's so many things that have been repurposed from other applications over the 120 years that we've been here. And that's what we focus on. The farming is so important to us. Both my father-in-law and brother-in-law are perfectionist farmers. They want it clean, they want it neat, and they want it environmentally safe.
Well, and as you said, you've got your son working with you. You've got generations to come, not just yours, but all of ours who want to appreciate the land. And I love that quote by Robert Frost, and I think that's a great guiding principle. Have you guys had any sort of climate change effects that you've seen having been on that farm for so long?
Yeah, it's climate change is definitely a factor here in the Willamette Valley. It's something that we need to address. We're addressing it in our farming practices, and how we can do that is in the past it was always a big challenge to get the grapes ripe here in the Willamette Valley. Some of those challenges have eased a bit, and so we're, like, for instance, this vintage. The grapes are beautifully ripened, and we really can kind of pick the time that we're going to harvest. But in mid-season, we're getting different types of events that, like late frosts and heat domes that are coming through the vineyard. So we have to carefully manage the canopy, how we hedge, how we leaf pull. Making sure that we're not taking away the shade that the canopy provides to the grapes. And so our practices are changing, and I think will continue to change. And moving and planting our new vineyard, our new addition to our vineyard up here at a little bit higher elevation, are all things that we're doing to try to adjust to what the weather is giving us every year.
Sure. And in terms of harvesting, so you started harvesting, is this early, late, average for you?
So it's, I guess what we're seeing is when we first started this venture, we would be harvesting in late September or early October. And what we're seeing now is we're harvesting in early September to mid-September. So in that respect, yes, the harvest has moved forward.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So you talked a little bit about the next generation, your son. Has he expressed his interest in going into the wine business with you?
Well, interestingly enough, I just had him in the vineyard today. He's a freshman at the University of Oregon. He's studying biology. And so he actually spent quite a bit of time talking to the viticulturalist out there that was overseeing the harvest. And so I think, I've learned, we have 4 kids, and we also have 2 grandchildren. And we have, my oldest daughter just moved here to Oregon, and with her 2 children. Oh. So we have the 6th and 7th generations here actively working with us. And my dream is that my son becomes a viticulturalist. My daughter becomes takes our place in running our tasting room and marketing and sales. And we have a daughter who's studying law. Every business needs a lawyer. And then my hope is one of the 2 grandchildren will become the next winemaker for Ghost Hill.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I hope we made clear that Mike and Drenda, your parents, Bernadette, are still on the property and still working.
Yeah, absolutely.
So cool. I mean, to have this deep family connection is lovely.
It's been really nice to take some of the things off of their plate. So they've worked on this. Well, we were overseas, so they worked on it by themselves for so long. So it's nice for us to be here and be able to let them step back and do whatever they would like to do and let go of the things they don't want to do.
Exactly. And then you guys, of course, will be next as your kids
Exactly.
letting you step back.
Well, Cam and Bernadette, it has been such a pleasure chatting with you, getting to know your story, the story of Ghost Hill Cellars. And we encourage our listeners to learn more about you and possibly come visit you when they're in the Willamette Valley.
How easy or difficult is it to get to you guys?
Very, very easy to get to. We're in very close to the town of Carlton, which I would recommend anybody to that's coming to the Willamette Valley to visit. It's my favorite town. Bernadette and I choose to live there. We're about 3 miles from the city of Carlton. We're a beautiful site to get to, and you'll always meet somebody from the family when you come.
Love that. We should also mention your price points are really reasonable.
Yes.
And the quality of the wine is so high, and it's just so refreshing to find that a wine fan doesn't have to break the bank to buy a bottle of your wine. So they average around $40 in that zone. And I think that's fantastic.
It's a great, great value for world-class Pinot Noir.
Thank you.
It is something that we actually have really focused on. In fact, Bernadette's father, Mike, he was insistent that we remain approachable and accommodating, for everyone. And so we want to keep that, and that's a big focus of ours going forward, to stay approachable to all people who enjoy drinking wine.
Well, we appreciate that.
Well, Cam and Bernadette, thank you again. Ghost Hill Cellars. What a wonderful story that you have. And I hope the only success you guys have going forward is nothing spooky, only good stuff. They're friendly ghosts. Remember Casper? So let's hope he's
right.
your old miner's
So far,
friendly
so good.
ghost.
Yes.
And we will put all the information on how to contact you all, where to find you, the wines that we tasted. Those will be on our show notes at sipsiphooraipodcast.com.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to both of you, and cheers. Sip, sip, hooray.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Mary Babbitt, what a delight speaking to Cam and Bernadette. I love the story. I mean, who doesn't love a good ghost story?
Mm-hmm.
But, the wines are equally as good and equally as interesting. And it's just nice to see a family working together and all these generations coming together.
Yeah. And they continually reinvent themselves, to switch from cattle farming to grapes, and then to have the good fortune to find that, actually, you're sitting on a terrific grape growing area.
Right.
I mean, what are the odds? It's just so lucky.
Exactly.
And I think that they've done all the right things to try to make what they're doing to create great wines and make a special place for people to visit.
Mm-hmm.
So super fun to get to know them.
Yeah,
and you, I love a good family story. So
right.
I hope if you enjoyed this podcast, you'll share it with your friends and tell them about Sip Sip Hooray, because that's truly how we grow our podcast.
Right. And please review us, rate us, maybe write a review wherever you listen to your podcast. That really helps people discover our pod, and we want to share it with more people.
Yeah, we like telling the stories, big and small. And so a small family winery is just as interesting as one of the big guns. And so I hope that you find those stories interesting as well.
And as I mentioned, you can find all the information about today's show, about the winery, the wines we tasted, on our website, sipsiphooraypodcast.com. While you're there, you can subscribe to our podcast, or you can also subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to so you don't miss a new episode once it drops.
It's also a great place to listen to old episodes because they're there for you. Also, you can follow us on social media. We're Sip Sip Hooray Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also subscribe to our Substack, where we put out new information about wine and help keep you up to date with what's going on in wine and things that we find interesting along the way.
Well, Mary Babbitt, cheers to another great episode. And I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Sip Sip Hooray, Mary.